kicking off 2019. My name is Alyssa Talaba, and I am SEARAC's Training Manager. Today, you'll be hearing from SEARAC's Executive Director, Quinn Din, and SEARAC's Director of National Policy, Katrina Dizon Mariategui. We'll also be joined by SEARAC's Operations Manager, Kelsey Hendrickson, who will be running tech for us and will be on deck to help with logistical issues. So on the issue of logistics, just a couple of housekeeping rules. Everyone's line is automatically muted. If you're joining us by phone, just a heads up that you must be logged into the actual webinar as well if you'd like to make comments, ask questions, or participate in our polls. Throughout the webinar, feel free to submit your comments and questions in the question area of the control panel. Kelsey will be monitoring them, and then we will address them both throughout and at the end of the webinar. To make a comment or question, you'll want to take a look at the control panel on the left. Under the question section, you can type your comments and questions there and direct them to the webinar organizers. Additionally, you can find downloadable files attached in the resources section. And lastly, as a reminder, we will be recording this webinar and we'll be sharing the recording with everyone who registered, as well as on social media later this week. So now that we've got the technical side out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. We always like to kick off these calls getting to know who all is on the call. So our first poll for you is, where are you joining us from today? East, West, Midwest, South, or other? So we'll give folks a couple minutes to answer, and then we'll see what we got. All right, a few more seconds. Great, so it looks like a majority of folks are calling in from the West Coast today. About a quarter of y'all are from the East, and then pretty evenly split between Midwest, South, and then other. Sorry to not name y'all, but we're happy to have you. Okay, so secondly, we always like to know if this is your first SEARAC community call or if you're a returning attendee. So again, we'll give folks a minute or two to answer, and then we'll see what we get. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Great, so it looks like we're pretty evenly split. So we have both new and returning attendees, so it's great to see you both. So this is again our first monthly webinar series for the year of 2019. We're happy to have y'all. We're gonna go ahead and go over the agenda real quick. So for this call, we're going to start off with an overview of SEARAC's 2018 through 2020 Southeast Asian American National Equity Agenda. From there, we'll touch on what our legislative priorities are with this new Congress. We'll also be sharing out on SEARAC's Census Strategy for 2019, moving towards 2020. And then we'll cap things off talking a little bit about our annual Leadership and Advocacy Training, or LAT program. Lastly, we'll go over as many audience questions as we can at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our Director of National Policy, Katrina Dizon Mariategui, who is going to get us started.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining our February community call. So for those of you returning, you might recall that last year we launched our National Southeast Asian American Equity Agenda, a framework that continues to guide our work as we shape our policy priorities for this year and 2020. This agenda keeps us grounded and reminds us that our work must center around the fight for our right to be counted by ensuring that our communities are made visible through census, our right to be seen and served through equitable education policies that serve our students, our right to heal through health policies that address intergenerational trauma of war, displacement, and poverty, and our right to families through immigration policies that unite, not divide. For folks on the webinar, you can access a copy of our equity agenda in the upload section of your GoToWebinar panel. So since we love polls, we wanted to kick things off real quick with with another poll question. So before we proceed, what types of updates do folks on the call find the most helpful for these community calls? The options would be broad, high-level policy or advocacy updates, or detailed policy advocacy negotiation updates, community engagement opportunities, program updates or leadership development opportunities, and lastly, new resources and analysis. We'll give folks a few seconds to fill in their answers. Oh, yes. Thank you folks for indulging us. This information will be super helpful as we craft our community calls in the future. So wow, it seems like folks really want very detailed policy negotiation updates. We could definitely provide those in the future. And then the rest of the folks are split between more broad, higher level updates and also community engagement opportunities, followed by new resources and analysis, and then opportunities around program and leadership development updates. So thank you, folks. That's very helpful as we plan for our next community call. So with that, we'd like to move on to sharing our 2019 legislative federal updates in the 116th Congress. And we'd like to kick it off first with our education priorities. So as folks recall from our past webinars, a lot of our work is really grounded around the fact that many Southeast Asian American students who are low income and first generation college students continue to face barriers to higher education. On average, over 50% of Southeast Asian students haven't attended college for any period of time compared to less than 40% of white students. Because of this, SEARAC's education policy work in 2019 will focus on the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, or the HEA, which is a legislative vehicle to expand college access and affordability through three main things. First is funding for institutions that enroll a large proportion of low-income Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native American students to improve support for underserved populations, or what we refer to as NAPC programs. Two, supportive programs aimed at helping low-income students of color apply for college, and this is through programs known as TRIO and GEAR Up. And three, support for Pell Grants, which help undergraduate students with financial need pay for college without having to take on excessive debt. For more information on our higher education priorities, folks can access our one-pager located in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. Additionally, SEARAC is committed to monitoring the Higher Education Act with coalition partners to ensure that negotiations take into consideration unique needs of Southeast Asian American students. We also want to promote the right of Southeast Asian American students to be visible through the collection and reporting of disaggregated data, and to do this by working to identify a policy champion to introduce legislation this year. We are committed to leading efforts in educating offices in Congress and to also build support for this policy, which we feel like is very important for the Southeast Asian American community. With that, we would like to ask another quick poll. Do you know, for folks on the phone, do you know anyone that would benefit from these education policies that were previously mentioned? So folks can choose between yes, myself, yes, students in my community, not sure, I need more information, or no. And we'll give folks a few seconds. Great. Thank you so much for providing your feedback. So it seems like a majority of folks feel like these policies would impact students in their community. The next is folks just need more information, and we're hopefully for the next couple of community calls we could provide that information. And a small number of folks are saying, actually, yes, myself, I would be impacted by these policies. So thank you everyone for sharing. And again, we'll continue to monitor these education policies as we see them to be having a huge impact on Southeast Asian students. Next is we wanted to talk about our priorities around health. So Southeast Asian Americans experience unique health and mental health challenges resulting from decades of trauma and the physical impacts of the U.S.-backed war in Southeast Asia. But unfortunately, our country's lack of a culturally and linguistically competent quality healthcare system hinders many of these challenges from being addressed. On average, about 40% of Southeast Asian households speak English less than very well, compared to 8.6% of total U.S. households overall. In addition, many Southeast Asian American communities experience poverty at very high rates. Because of this, SEARAC's health policy work in 2019 will focus on continued monitoring and education on the Health Equity and Accountability Act, or HEA for short, a bill that has been introduced previously in Congress. This bill allows for the collection and reporting of disaggregated data to inform more culturally and linguistic appropriate health services for minority communities. Additionally, we will support our coalition partners who are leading advocacy for the HEAL Act, a bill that would allow green card holders to gain access to Medicaid and benefits under the ACA without having to wait the current standard of 5 years. This will also expand access for some undocumented community members who have qualified for DACA, or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, a program instituted under the Obama administration that protected some undocumented young people from deportation. The HEAL Act would potentially expand health coverage for many newer Southeast Asian immigrants and their family members. It is our hope that these bills, if passed, will do much to close the gap experienced by many Southeast Asian community members and elders struggling for more equitable access to healthcare in our country. And with that, we wanted to do another poll and ask folks, what provisions of HEA and HEAL do you think would help the Southeast Asian American community the most? Would it be the collection of disaggregated data, the creation of systems to holistically address health, culturally and linguistic appropriate health and mental health services, eliminating health access barriers for more immigrants, or all of the above? Great, thank you for those that participated. So let's check out the results. So it sounds like an overwhelming majority of people feel like all of these are important issues for the Southeast Asian American community. So thank you so much for reaffirming us in terms of the priorities we want to be focusing on this year for health policy. And with that, we want to move on to our immigration priorities for 2019. So in the Southeast Asian American community, about 16,000 community members have received final orders of removal since 1998, a majority of them due to old criminal records for sentences already served. Under the Trump administration, we continue to see an escalation in the targeting, detention, and deportation of community members despite their transformation, support of U.S. citizen family members, and contributions to their communities. Additionally, this administration has repeatedly attempted to cut legal forms of immigration into the country, impacting many more recent Southeast Asian immigrant families. Due to the mass outcry and community organizing from grassroots organizations around the country, members of Congress are finally starting to take notice and take a public stand. In 2019, SEARAC will continue this momentum we've built with local, state, and elected leaders by continuing to educate them on the need for policy solutions that allow our Southeast Asian American community members a right to be with family by supporting just immigration laws. We will continue with advocacy, monitoring, and community education around the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, a bill that has been previously introduced and supported by SEARAC. This legislation works to make immigration detention standards more humane and would cut immigration detention overall. We will also support our coalition partners who are leading efforts to get the Reuniting Families Act reintroduced. The Reuniting Families Act, or RFA, would modernize our family-based immigration system to eliminate backlogs and expand the category of family members that immigrants are able to sponsor to come to the United States. It would also eliminate barriers to sponsor loved ones who had been previously deported. In 2016, over 93% of newer Southeast Asian immigrants in the United States came so due to a family-based visa petition. This policy would support these families and many others who are trying to reunite with a loved one. Lastly, SEARAC actually recently led the national Asian American effort to reject a harmful appropriations compromise bill that passed the House and Senate on February 14th. Included in this so-called compromise was an increase in funding for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a move that would strengthen ICE's detention and deportation force even more. On the same day the president signed this bill, he announced a national emergency to fund his hateful border wall. 15 states immediately sued the administration, and it was followed by mass bipartisan opposition. With the current administration's ongoing attacks on immigrants and refugees, much of SEARAC's work in 2019 will focus on defending against bad bills, but we also see the value in pushing for positive legislative solutions to end Southeast Asian deportations overall. We will achieve this by working with broader immigration advocates to identify and explore new opportunities that emerge in Congress, particularly in the democratically controlled House. And with that, we have another poll for folks. We'd love to ask, what immigration issues are you most interested in addressing through legislation? Would it be improving detention standards for immigrants, improving our family-based immigration system, limiting mandatory deportation, advocating for pathways to citizenship for undocumented people, or naturalization? And we'll give folks a few seconds. Great, thank you so much everyone for participating. So let's check out the results. Wow, it seems like almost half of you are interested in pathways to citizenship for undocumented people, followed by limiting mandatory deportation. And then it seems like it's pretty equally divided between improving our family-based immigration system and efforts around naturalization. So thank you so much. We will definitely take those into consideration as we continue to refine our policy priorities for the year. And with that, I would love to hand it over now to SEARAC's Executive Director, Quinn Din, who will review with us SEARAC's Census Strategy for 2019.
Great. Thanks so much, Katrina, for those great updates. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your feedback as it relates to how these issues could impact you and also what you find most pressing. So for us, one of the pressing issues that we are really focused on is Census 2020 and making sure that we're gearing up for a powerful 2019 and 2020 education, outreach, and mobilization efforts to really get out the Southeast Asian American count that will allow our community to build our political power by being fully counted. So in our, I think it was our September call, we asked folks what type of materials would you find most beneficial to doing education on census with your communities. And folks at the time shared that print articles, television PSAs would be really helpful, followed by information like fact sheets about the census, and also radio PSAs and webinars like this. So for today's call, we wanted to continue sharing with folks where we're at in terms of what we're hearing from partners from across the country on what are some of their concerns and what are some of the strategies that they're looking at for 2019 and 2020, and also sharing with folks what this input has resulted on SEARAC side and what we're looking to gear up for the next couple of years. And just in terms of a quick policy update on census, folks may know that last year there was an effort by the Trump administration to add a question to the census to ask for a person's citizenship. And at SEARAC, we mobilized over close to 1,000 comments to denounce the addition of this question. And most recently in January, the first of 3 court cases was heard to really question the legality of adding a citizenship question. And the New York court found that adding that question would actually lead to an undercount. So their finding was that they would prohibit the citizenship question from being added to the census. So for folks who are monitoring that news, that for us is a big win, in that this really helps to provide grounding for not having the citizenship question be added to the questionnaire, which we know would really lead to a lot of fear within our communities. And so with that, that segues into some of the initial findings that we've heard from our partners from across the country around what are some of the concerns and best practices that they're looking at. You'll see here that one of the recurring themes that we've heard is that people don't know about census. There have been research done by Asian Americans Advancing Justice, for example, that showed that close to 70% of Asian Americans have come to the U.S. Within the past 10 years. And so this would actually be the first census that they've ever been a part of. And in addition to that, we're also hearing that folks actually don't care, or they don't know why it's important to be counted. And that it raises a really big concern in terms of how much education is going to be required for the community. We also have heard that even though the citizenship question might not be added, that it has raised a lot of fear around whether it is safe to take the census at all. And so we know that this fear is contributing to additional community education concerns that, that are different from the 2010 census. And there was also an additional concern around decreased federal funding as it relates to 2020 census outreach and education, as folks anticipate that this means that there will be decreased coverage in press, including ethnic media. And in contrast to that, there were some recurring themes around what are some of the best practices that folks are looking to executing in the next couple of years. The first major area of census work is really about educating the community in a couple different ways. One is really just starting with the basics of sharing what census is, why it's important, and then talking about how you actually get counted to make the process really easy and really empowering for individuals. And from there, you want to then create materials that inspire folks to actually stay committed to being counted, and then also getting other folks to be counted. And then finally, shifting towards activation. So creating materials that really help to mobilize folks to get out to be counted, whether it is filling it out within their own home or going to a public library. I forgot one of the major changes is that this is going to be the first online census that we've ever had as a country. And so while our community members raise that there are concerns around that, a lot of folks are actually really optimistic about how it's actually going to increase access for a lot of community members. And then finally, the last couple themes are that social media will play a more important role than ever. A lot of our community members have shared that there have been ethnic media outlets that have not been as strong in their communities. And so community members are now looking to Facebook or Twitter to get almost all their information, and that this is going to be a really critical avenue for both education and mobilization. And finally, around mobilization, folks really talked about the importance of having local ambassadors in really key neighborhoods where we know that it's going to be difficult to get to those community members. And in addition to that, folks are really excited about experiencing more with text messaging mobilization, learning that, for example, low-income and immigrant communities may not have as high access to broadband at home, but that they are on their cell phones and mobile devices a lot more. and so making sure that we utilize mobile strategies. And then finally, going back to the basics, is meeting people where they're at is the importance of going to places like supermarkets where folks congregate, and where in 2010, a lot of our partners were able to get a lot of success in helping folks to be counted for Census 2010. And finally, with that, the feedback that we got from our community members really helped to inform what SEARAC is envisioning for our own Southeast Asian American Count 2020 campaign. And essentially, we're looking at 3 major approaches, which is very similar to what we've done in the past, but building on the best practices of what we know. So the first is definitely coalition building and providing training and consultation to leaders in some of the highest populous Southeast Asian American states. And so for sure, we know that a couple of those states are going to be California, Washington, Minnesota, and Texas. So this year we'll be convening those leaders, most likely virtually, to make sure that we're coordinating and that we're sharing best practices and resources to really get out the count in our strong Southeast Asian American states. From there, our second strategy is really to educate and to inspire folks to get out the count. And so a couple key areas here for us is that one is that we're looking into creating a Southeast Asian American specific hard to count map, which really breaks down each census tract in the country and is able to identify which of these census tracts have high Southeast Asian American populations and also did not have very high return rates for 2010. So our hope is that this map will actually guide our communities in being really targeted at where we do our outreach and education and mobilization. We'll then shift into material development, working with our partners to develop materials like fact sheets on what census is, why, how. We're experimenting with the idea of potentially doing video tutorials, and then also drumming up a really strong social media campaign to make sure that this year we're starting to build up energy and passion around getting out the count and making sure that there's strong Southeast Asian American cultural and artistic components to that social media campaign. And finally, around mobilization, we are anticipating ongoing trainings through webinars like this, through calls, through our training programs like our LAT program, which Alyssa will talk about later, as well as our Equity Summit programming. We'll also be experimenting with direct canvassing with some of our partners, and then we'll also be looking to mobilize our LAT alumni base, which are over 1,000 alumni from over 40 states who have been trained through our 3-day advocacy training. And our hope is that we'll be able to make sure that we text them to get out the count, but also that we empower them to be ambassadors within their own local communities to get out the count, and also to connect with organizations so that we're building out the local volunteer base of our partners. And with that, we would love to pause and ask a question for folks. And we realized that we had not asked this basic question in the last couple calls, which is, are you or your organization planning to do work around Census 2020? We have a couple different options, a lot, including both education and mobilization, some including maybe just education or mobilization, maybe if you are looking for more information, or also no, but that this isn't going to be an area of focus, but that maybe you'd like more information about that as well. So we'll give folks just a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds to weigh in. Just give folks another second, and then we'll publish, or we'll make the results live. Great. So it looks like half to half is yes, with a lot or some, and then we also have folks who are looking for more information. So that's super helpful, as our plan is to continue integrating census updates into each of our community calls. But this also helps us to determine whether we need additional calls focused just on census. So we'll take this information back to the SEARAC team as we finalize our plans and as we make some final adjustments. And with that, I will transition it to Alyssa to share out about a couple upcoming opportunities we have.
Thanks, Quinn. Yeah, so as Quinn mentioned, our annual Leadership and Advocacy Training program is going on its 20th year in 2019. So over the course of 20 years, we've graduated over 1,000 alumni from 40 states for our 3-day training for emerging advocates. This year, we will be holding it again in Washington, D.C. over the summer, June 19th through the 21st. For those who aren't familiar, LAT sits at the intersection of our 3 main objectives of community engagement, capacity building, and policy advocacy. We will be bringing together about 50 community members to build community, teach them how to effectively advocate, and bring them to Capitol Hill to uplift their stories to their elected officials. LAT is best suited for folks who are interested in learning about policies affecting the Southeast Asian American community, who are looking to connect with other Southeast Asian American community members from across the country, who are highly motivated to advocate for the Southeast Asian American community, and who are at least 18 years old. Applications are currently open, and they'll close 1 week from today on February 28th. The link is there, as well as on our LAT site, which is SEARAC.org/LAT, where you can find more information. We welcome individuals from all 50 states to apply, but because of key opportunities in Congress, we especially encourage folks from California, Florida, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming to apply. And those states are all listed on our website and the application as well. To give everyone a little bit of a community perspective on LAT, of the 43 folks that SEARAC graduated last year, the cohort included Sean Iv, a Cambodian husband and father from Pensacola, Florida, who reached out to SEARAC for help with advocacy on his deportation order. Sean and his group of fellow participants met with a number of lawmakers, including his own representative, a conservative Trump supporter, to educate his office on the wide-reaching impact of short-sighted immigration policies. Sean shared with us his reflections from his LAT experience, which you can see here. We have a new president and things are getting scary. I see people in my situation and they're fighting for the same cause. SEARAC opened my eyes to fight for all immigrants, and it really touches me. I'm not just fighting for myself, I'm part of a united Southeast Asian American community, and we won't be quiet. So in summary, that really kind of highlights LAT's purpose to build community and empower folks to really share their stories on these policies and show their elected officials why they're so passionate about it. This year, we look forward to welcoming another cohort of passionate advocates who are eager for change in their own lives and communities. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and we'll pause here now and open the lineup for Q&A. For this portion, we just want to remind folks of a few ground rules. So one, please share your name and, if applicable, your organization or affiliation. Please respect other points of view. And then finally, please try to be concise and provide your remarks within 2 minutes to help us get to as many folks' questions as possible. Again, to make a comment or question, please look to the control panel. You'll see an orange arrow at the top. You should be seeing also an icon to raise your hand if you would like to share out verbally. If you would like to, we will unmute you and let you know that your line is open for comment. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can also just type your question in the question box. So we'll pause here now to give folks a chance to ask any questions, and then we'll go ahead and report out. So go ahead and submit any, and we'll give folks a few minutes. Great. So we have one question asking, what is SEARAC's stance or role around Trump's national emergency?
Yes, thank you, Alyssa. So as folks know, if they were following the news last week, after Trump signed the compromise appropriations bill, he immediately followed it with declaring a national emergency to be able to pull funds and bypass Congress in order to build a border wall that cost $5.7 billion. So after this was announced, SEARAC mobilized Asian American partner organizations here in Washington, D.C. to basically announce, well, first, the compromise bill that was signed, and then second, the national emergency, which we feel like is a smokescreen. It's a fake emergency manufactured by the Trump administration to distract folks from the real issues of immigration that we feel like still need to be addressed. So we definitely oppose this effort by the Trump administration to build this border wall. We will continue to monitor the situation and work with partners to make sure that our members of Congress know that the Asian American community absolutely does not agree with this approach, and that we want them to show their leadership and instead focusing on addressing real problems that we're seeing in our current immigration system.
Great, thank you. We have another question about our census work. If we could share out what our partnerships look like in cities and counties that have high Southeast Asian populations.
That's a really, really great question. So we're still deciding on that, but essentially we are thinking of a couple different types of resources that we would be able to provide to predominantly, mostly community-based organizations who are really trusted messengers and leaders within their community to get out the count, to get out the information that we need around census and to do mobilization. So what that will look like will be, for some organizations, we envision actually providing some sub-grants for them to do outreach, education, and mobilization work. We know from partners that some of those resources will be going to things like volunteer stipends for young people to do door-to-door canvassing and knocking. It'll go to resources like ethnic media placement in really local communities because local leaders know those outlets way better than anyone else. And for organizations that we won't be able to sub-grant to, which is going to be a lot, because unfortunately our funding is not going to be as robust as we want. For those organizations, we're looking to provide resources like our printed materials that can be distributed anywhere, from social media to radio and television placements, and also providing an opportunity to connect these leaders with each other through what we envision will be something like quarterly community calls like this that will be focused just on census strategy. If folks have recommendations for us as we build out those partnerships, we're very much still in the finalization stages, so please feel free to email us any recommendations as well.
Great, thanks Catherine for that question. We'll give folks another minute or two for a last call for questions, and then if there aren't any more, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Okay, looking like that there are no more questions, we'll just go ahead and wrap this call up. If you have any additional questions as you further reflect or need more information, feel free to contact Quinn for census info. For anything related to our policy priorities, you can get in touch with Katrina. And for any LAT related questions, feel free to get in touch with me. On the next slide, there will be our email addresses. So they're all just our names at SEARAC.org. I also wanted to send a final reminder that this will be, this is recording, so we'll be sharing this recording out to all of you via email as well as on social media. So again, thank you all for joining us for our very first call for 2019. We hope this information was helpful to you, and we look forward to working with you as we continue to uplift Southeast Asian American issues on a local, state, and national level. We'll see y'all next month. Thanks.